Hello and welcome to the Northeast Grazing and Livestock Conference. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the National Grazing Lands Coalition, American Farmland Trust, Farm Credit East, Morrison Custom Feeds, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Please take a moment to visit their virtual booths for more information about their work. I'd also like to thank our partners, the Cedar Tree Foundation and the Forest C and Francis H. Latner Foundation. They help make our work possible throughout the year. The entire New England Grazing Network would like to thank you for your participation in our first annual Northeast Grazing and Livestock Conference. Enjoy the conference. Let's get moving and start this conference. And so it is my pleasure to welcome Alan Williams. He's the whole package. He's a farmer, a researcher, a vocal advocate for teaching regenerative ag, and a recovering academic. I've had the pleasure to hear Alan speak many times, and never once has the content been the same. His breadth of knowledge and work is vast. I think once you've seen Alan, all you can really say is that you've seen Alan once. We're really looking forward to having him up here on the pastures this spring. But today, let's let him set the stage and be a little disruptive. So welcome, Alan.
Well, thank you very much. It is absolutely a pleasure to be here this morning, and looking forward to our session, and especially looking forward to discussion and Q&A and all of that after my presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen here. And okay, is everything up? Beautiful. All right. So this morning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start us off talking about what we define as the rules of adaptive stewardship and how you can effectively and efficiently apply these rules to your specific operation under your context to allow you to achieve a whole plethora of benefits, including enhanced profitability. And when I say profitability, I'm talking about net profitability, not gross, but net, because that's what really matters. And also improvement of your quality of life. And I'll keep sort of interjecting things about this quality of life deal as we go through. A little bit about us. Well, let's see, there we go. Okay. So I'm one of the founding partners of Understanding Ag. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about us at Understanding Ag. We also are the founders of the Soil Health Academy and a company that we just launched in January of 2022 called Regenified, which is a regenerative verification company. But within Understanding Ag, we are real farmers and ranchers. We're not, academic types. We're not, theorists, whatever you want to call it. We actually do this every single day on our own operations, as well as being able to consult with and help many others along the way. So we have consulted now with more than 4,500 farmers and ranchers and many others. We consult up and down what you might call the food chain. We also work and consult with processors, branded food companies, institutions, agencies, NGOs, and so forth, relative to some companies and institutions that we have consulted with. Just a very short list. This list really has grown quite expansive, but some that you may recognize. We've done a lot of work with General Mills, Danone, Vital Farms, Whole Foods, Unilever, Mars Corporation, the Noble Research Institute, so on and so forth. We now have active consulting staff all over the U.S., but we also have consultants within Understanding Ag that are based in Canada, Mexico, the UK, and Ireland. And we continue to expand that staff to other countries as well. So right now we're consulting in about 41 countries and all 50 US states. And in the US alone, we're working across about 33 million acres. So this has really expanded quite dramatically. And we're really pleased to see the sort of what I would term a snowballing adoption rate. So here's some of the challenges and issues that we're facing in agriculture today. Wind and water erosion, loss of soil organic matter and carbon, lack of ability of our soils to infiltrate and retain water. Boy, are we ever seeing this in California right now. We've got a lot of nutrient leaching. We've got water quality issues, water availability issues. And we hear all the time, every day, about greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, so on and so forth. But some of the other things that we're seeing and experiencing, we're seeing a significant decline in the nutritive value of our foods. And that is becoming more and more evident. That's something that we're working very diligently in, by the way. And I'm not going to be sharing a lot about that this morning in this session, but please feel free to contact me more about it if you want to. But we're doing a lot of very high level and cutting edge phytonutrient research that is quite revealing. And like I said, that's a whole entire other presentation, but this is something that we have made some very significant discoveries in. Obviously, if you're a farmer or rancher, you know that over the last 2 years, we have seen skyrocketing prices in virtually every input that is affecting us. There's a lot of consumer confusion out there. We've got a lot of consumers that just frankly are, they don't know what to eat, what to buy, what to emphasize. And to be quite honest, we have to lay the blame a lot on a lot of places. There's a very recent study that just came out, unfortunately funded by the NIH and conducted by Tufts University. And I'm just going to call it out. I'm going to say it is what it is, but their research is incredibly disturbing and incredibly wrong. But it's peer reviewed and it's put out there as quote fact. But all of these things, all of these myriad problems that we're experiencing, quite frankly, we view these as opportunities because we know that we can resolve the vast majority of these. And it's not that hard, to be honest with you, to do it. And so problems present opportunities, and that's how we like to view things. Now, here's a U.S. drought monitor from mid-November of 2022. And as you can see that by November of last year, we had about 2/3 of the U.S. under anything from a D1 to D4 drought. And these pictures were pretty common last year. The Mississippi River, the Ohio River, record low flow rates and water levels in those rivers. This picture was taken on the west bank of the Mississippi River, standing in Arkansas and West Memphis, looking across the river to Memphis. That pyramid is the Bass Pro Shops pyramid in Memphis. Now, does that look like the mighty Mississippi to you? So that's what we were experiencing. It actually stopped barge traffic, for quite a while. We're seeing record levels of soil degradation globally. And in the maps that you're seeing here are only representing the soil degradation that has occurred over the last 50 years. And it's not accounting for the degradation that has occurred prior to that. And the same with this map. It's soil degradation in the US in the past 50 years, but we're not really accounting for the degradation that's occurred over the last 400 years in the continental US. But if you look at this map, when you look at it, the oranges and the reds are where we've had the highest level of soil degradation over the last 5 decades. Where has that occurred? This is what is so disturbing about this. It's occurred throughout, the Midwestern U.S. Obviously, the grain belt, corn and beans and wheat and all of that, the lower Mississippi River Delta, and then look out west, the Central Valley of California, where many of our fruits and vegetables and nuts and so forth are grown, and the Palouse in Eastern Washington. So all of this is very real. And these pictures that I'm showing right now, this is not from the 1930s Dust Bowl, folks. Okay. These were pictures taken in the Midwest in 2022. And unfortunately, it was far too easy for us to take these types of pictures. So we are in the middle of our second Dust Bowl. That's what I tell people. And I firmly believe that we're not approaching a second Dust Bowl. We're already there. And this is the Kansas Colorado border, May 19, 2022. Look at that massive dust storm. Yeah, and we're just seeing far too many of these. So my question is, what have we learned over the last 80 plus years? Yeah, if you look at the picture from the original Dust Bowl in 1935 and then Colorado in 2014. So see, this has been going on for now and almost a decade now, this new Dust Bowl. The magnitude of the dust storms are no different. They are no different. But there is one major difference. And I'm going to ask you, look at these two pictures, okay? The 2014 on the left and the 1935 on the right. There is a major difference, not in the magnitude of the dust storm, but what's the difference? Look at the color of the soil that's being blown away. At least in 1935, we were blowing away real topsoil, A horizon, original A horizon. But in 2014, we don't even have that left. So now we're blowing away B horizon soil. Now, another thing that we are experiencing and that we're seeing more and more of is insect ecosystem collapse. And this is continuing to happen at an alarming rate all over the world. Now, in October of 2022, we were over in the UK and Ireland for most of that month, working with farmers over there. And one of the things that really struck us was their extreme lack of insects and birds. Yeah, and they didn't even realize it. They thought that was just normal. But this has been going on now for 50 plus years in the UK and Ireland. So that certainly was an issue. Now, I love this quote by W.C. Loudermilk, and I use it often, and it's so very true. The land does not lie. It bears a record of what men write on it, a record that is easy to read by those who understand the simple language of the land. So bottom line is this: our management is written on the tapestry of the land. And, whenever we step foot on a client's farm or ranch, they can't lie to us. Or if they try, we know that they're lying to us. We know within a few minutes, to be honest with you, how they have truly been managing their farm, their ranch. And certainly when we stick a shovel in their ground, we carry a shovel everywhere we go, and I'll talk more about that later. But the moment we stick a shovel in the ground in their soil, we know exactly what's been going on and how it's been managed. So this is true. The land does not lie. Now, we work within and focus on regenerative agriculture. That's what we do. And you got to have a definition. This is the definition. I know there's many definitions out there, but this is what we do every day. And because of the extensiveness of our work, and we're working globally and have seen this in every environment and practically every type of agricultural enterprise, honestly, we do feel qualified to define this. And this is our definition. Regenerative agriculture is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature and the 4 ecosystem processes to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem function, starting with life beneath the soil. And that's key. That part is key. We must start with life beneath the soil and then expanding to life above. Now, how do we accomplish it? On a day-to-day basis by using what we call the 6-3-4. I'm going to give you a brief explanation of that, but today I'm going to focus on the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. So we use this quote often by Don Campbell. If you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make major changes, you absolutely have to change the way you see things. That is so important. So the 634, what is it? Well, here we go. And I'm not going to take up much time with this, so we can dive into the rules, but it starts with the 6 principles of soil health. Number 1 is know your context. That's so critically important. If you don't first take time to define your context, not anybody else's, yours on your farm, okay, that's critical. Then the honest truth is you cannot successfully and appropriately apply the other 5. So context is critical. And that's why we, within Understanding Ag, added that principle to the principles of soil health, because it's an absolute must. Number 2, minimize disturbance. Okay. And this is disturbance of all types. Most people think here, well, you're just talking about tillage. Yes, we are, but we're talking about a number of other types of disturbances. So we're talking about synthetic fertilizer disturbance, chemical application disturbance, overgrazing, all of those things are disturbances that we need to minimize. Third is armor on the soil. Keep the soil covered at all times. Number 4, diversity. And this is not just diversity in the plant species. Now, do we want that? You bet we do. But it's diversity in the microbial species beneath the soil, beneficial insect species and pollinators, birds, wildlife, so on and so forth. And even in our crop rotations, if we're doing cropping, and in our livestock enterprises, we can have monoculture livestock enterprises. And unfortunately, too many farms do. You have just beef cattle or just dairy cows or just sheep or whatever, and we need to think about diversity there. Number 5, living roots in the soil at all times. And number 6, integrate livestock properly. Okay. So all of that really helps. The 3 out of the 634 are the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. This is what we're going to spend basically the rest of our morning on. And I'll explain them. I'll just introduce them to you now and explain them to you more fully in a moment. Number 1, the rule of compounding. Number 2, the rule of diversity. And number 3, the rule of disruption. And then the whole purpose of the 6 and the 3 and effectively applying them. And by the way, in a non-prescriptive manner. Do not take the 634 and turn it into a prescription, okay? Because the very moment you do that is the moment you are no longer regenerative and adaptive. You cannot be regenerative and adaptive and also prescriptive. They're antagonistic to each other, okay? So do not confuse that. But we implement the 6 and the 3 to do this, to maximize the 4 ecosystem processes. And what are they? Energy flow, sunlight, photosynthesis, okay? We want to capture as much of that sunlight, intercept it with a plant as possible. We don't want what we call photosynthetic leakage, sunlight hitting the bare ground without a plant leaf intercepting it. That is wasted sunlight. So photosynthetic capture is critically important for the energy flow, this energy cycle. Number 2, the water cycle. Boy, is this ever broken. Yeah, and we've got evidence of that all around us here, just in the US alone, not mentioning other countries around the world. The mineral cycle, this is also broken, and it's our fault. We can't blame anything else for these 4 ecosystem processes not functioning properly. It's always our fault if they're not functioning properly. And then diversity. Okay. And you've heard that term now 3 times, right? Diversity. It's in the 6 principles, it's in the 3 rules, and it's in the 4 ecosystem processes. That's how important diversity is. We must have it in all of those. Okay. We often hear the question, and we don't just hear it here in the US, but we hear it in many other countries as well. Well, if this is so great, why hasn't everybody adopted it? Why isn't everybody doing it? Well, I mean, the truth of the matter, folks, is there's a lot of things that are great that not everybody is doing. Okay. Um, look at all the health problems that we have. Look at, obesity issues, things like that. Well, we know exercise and eating well are great, but does everybody do it? No, they do not. And that's just a human condition. So, you know, honestly, that's not a very good question at all. If this is so great, why isn't everybody doing it? That because humans are humans is the answer. Okay. And a lot of people just want to keep doing what they're doing because they're comfortable with it. So here in the US and globally, we have identified the top three barriers to adoption to regenerative ag and adaptive stewardship. And they are, first and foremost, lack of awareness and education. You simply cannot implement what you do not know. Okay. Second is peer pressure, and peer pressure in the ag community. And I'm a sixth generation family farmer. My family's been on their farm since 1840. And I'm going to tell you, I've grown up in this, and peer pressure is very, very real. And when we go to other countries, it's very real there as well. Okay. And if you're doing anything different from your other family members, neighbors, friends, whatever, you're looked upon like, what in the heck do you think you're doing? You know? So we get peer pressure from family, from neighbors, from friends, unfortunately, even from university faculty, from some extension leaders, from everybody that sells you stuff to lenders. It comes from a whole bunch of different sources. Now, I'm not saying that out of all of these, that everybody within these categories exerts peer pressure, because they don't. But it certainly comes from individuals within all of these. And then the third is debt load. And unfortunately, debt load in agriculture, and particularly here in the US, is the greatest it's ever been. And here's the ironic thing about this, okay, is that many farms are in debt because of the way they've been doing things up to that point. That's why they have the debt. So they desperately need to change something. But the fear of that debt keeps them encumbered to what they've been doing. They're so fearful that if they change anything, and they're already on the edge, that if it doesn't work, they're out of business and they've lost the family farm. So the debt load creates a huge fear level here. So those are the top three barriers. And again, we have found these to be the case over and over. Now, here's what happens in a cropping situation as we move more and more towards regenerative management. We experience more life exploding beneath the soil and above the soil. The same thing in a grazing situation. So as we move along the continuum from more continuous grazing and set stock grazing systems to adaptive grazing systems, we see the exact same thing happening. Life exploding, starting with life beneath the soil surface and expanding to life above. Here's some of the key baseline measurements that we always take when we work with anybody, and we encourage you to do the same thing, because these are wonderful measurements and allow us to be able to track and monitor progress and define exactly where we are right now. So we have three soil tests that we do all the time. They're the Haney, the PLFA, and the TND. And if you want to know more about those, then please contact us at understandingag.com. And we've done hundreds of thousands of these, so we know exactly how to interpret them and what they mean and what they're telling us. Another is a water infiltration test on your farm. We've done water infiltration tests literally all over North America. And unfortunately, I'll have to tell you that the vast majority of farms and ranches, the average water infiltration rates are a half inch an hour or less. Okay, so that means when we get, excessive rainfall or moisture, our soils can't infiltrate it. They can't take it in, so it runs off. It also means when we get into drought conditions, our soils don't have any water to retain. Okay, so we exacerbate the drought conditions very quickly. And then a very simple shovel test. Okay. And you see that in the bottom pictures here, just simply taking a spade or a sharpshooter and routinely digging in your soil, taking divots out of the soil and seeing what does it really look like? Is it crusted on top? Do I have plated, compacted layers? How are my roots growing? How deep are my roots growing? Or do I have highly aggregated, biologically active soil with deep growing roots and a lot of root biomass? So those are keys to establishing your baseline and monitoring your future progress. This is last March, we were out in the Central Valley of California doing a lot of work and then teaching the Soil Health Academy. These pictures, and we drove pretty much the entire length of the Central Valley. And unfortunately, these pictures are far, far too easy to capture. These are some of the pictures we took, and it was very disturbing to us. But these were typical almond and walnut orchards out there, and this is what they look like. Okay. And then during our academy, we took our group to a university model orchard, considered a model orchard. Okay. And they were doing research and teaching the farmers out there how to do this, right. And how to manage their orchards. And yet, unfortunately, this is what we saw at the university. Okay. Look at all the bare exposed ground there. We stuck a water infiltration ring. This is our class, our Soil Health Academy class, by the way. We stuck a water infiltration ring in the soil various places and, put water in, and it just sat and sat. It never went anywhere, no infiltration. Did shovel test here. The soil was, it was hard to penetrate below the top 2 inches, to be quite honest with you. The soil was that compacted, that plated. We found out from, university personnel that they were making 10 to 12 or more pesticide applications on these orchards every year. And of course, they required a lot of irrigation and synthetic fertility applied to support this. So can this be done differently? So the answer is yes. So I keep going the wrong way. All right. So this is one of our clients' orchards in that same Central Valley, just less than 30 miles away from the university orchard. Okay. In the same year, in the middle of a D4 drought. Okay. And does that look like it's in a D4 drought to you? All right. So this particular farmer here, he attended a Soil Health Academy 4 years ago, and he made radical changes in what he was doing in his orchards. And 4 years later, boom, look at what's happening here. So just amazing growth up underneath those trees. And again, these are pictures of what his orchards look like now. And remember, this is in the middle of a D4 drought. Okay. And he's also doing this. Okay. So this is 1,000 head of sheep that he's grazing through these orchards, single-stranded polywire, moving them every day. And getting phenomenal results in terms of what he's doing here. So if we look at the bottom line of what's happening here, he has reduced, and again in the middle of D4 drought, okay, he's reduced his irrigation applications by over 50%. He is not applying any synthetic fertility anymore. The sheep are applying the fertility and the biology that he needs. And he has reduced all pesticide applications, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, and so forth by 80+% now after just 4 years. So everything is far healthier. And oh, by the way, he's got another income stream from the sheep. He's also added beehives. So now he's got a third income stream off the exact same acres. So it's rather phenomenal, what he was able to do in a short period of time. So now let's dive into adaptive grazing and adaptive stewardship. And we're going to spend the rest of our time this morning on this. So adaptive grazing, what is it? Well, it is a form of grazing that allows us to be fully adaptable and flexible to ever-changing conditions. Nothing on a farm or ranch stays static, but we often operate as if it does. Everything changes constantly. There is no such thing as normal or average, on a day-to-day basis. That doesn't exist. Another thing about adaptive grazing that we have found, and we've been doing this since the 1990s now, is that it produces the greatest results in the shortest period of time. We have yet to see it hit a threshold. So we're continuing to make incremental progress as we go, even after 30 plus years of doing this. And it allows us, this is what I really like as a farmer, it allows us to achieve the highest levels of profitability. And here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reinitiate a fully functioning carbon cycle. This is really important. And how are we doing this? Well, we're using our livestock as a proxy. To wild ruminants. We are simulating nature, simulating what the wild ruminants used to do for us. Now, this is a video. This is on our farm in Alabama. And what you're seeing here, this is a move of our finishing herd. So we do grass finishing. This is 600 head of grass finishers. And so, you can see they move very readily. You're starting to see a lot of birds, okay, and all kinds of birds. You've got those are the snowy egrets that you see there in the background, the big white birds. We've got wood swallows there. We've got brown cowbirds, a whole host of other birds here that follow our livestock every day and take advantage of the insects and so forth that the livestock are stirring up. So our bird populations have exploded. Our insect populations have exploded. And the cattle are easy to move. Again, this is a mere, 2 to 3 minutes to move 600 head into a new paddock for grazing. And so there's nothing really hard about this. And this is what it looks like. That's that same group in that same field, that same day. These are the typical stock densities that we utilize. We like to move our finishing herd about anywhere from 3 to 5 times a day. And we like to make all of those moves in about a 6 to 8 hour period, and the bulk of the moves in the afternoon to take advantage of higher plant bricks and the extra gain in performance that we get from that. This is easy to do. There's nothing hard about this, and the livestock benefits, the soil benefits, our diversity, our plant species, everything benefits from this, and we get a very high level of performance on them, a very high degree of finish. We average 90+% USDA choice and up on our grass finished beef. So that's higher than any feedlot averages, to be quite honest with you. This is on one of our clients. This is in Cold Spring, Minnesota, one of our dairy clients, doing the same thing with their lactating cows. So you see here a move, just lifting the fence, the cows moving under. Here on this particular farm, these cows are moved about 4 to 5 times every day between milkings. And, it's very easy. They are maximizing their forage dry matter consumption so that they optimize performance, both fluid milk production, milk component production. Now, for those of y'all that are dairy farmers in this group this morning, surely you've picked up on one thing here. There's calves in this group of lactating cows that are being milked every day. Yep, that's exactly right. So what we have found is that, raising these calves on earth cows and grazing them out with the herd is vital to their epigenetic development. And epigenetics are also transgenerational. So as we do this, we're not only building better epigenetics and lifetime performance in these calves that you see here, but then when they start calving themselves, that passes along to their offspring as well. Now, as we look at the results here, so this is Kent Solberg, one of our consultants in Understanding Ag and a dairy farmer himself in Minnesota. This is the previously grazed paddock, okay? And so look at the degree of trample. that you see there, that was about 400,000 pounds of stock density that was applied, in 4 to 5 moves a day. And just like with our finishing animals, with these lactating cows, we have found that you optimize forage dry matter intake and performance with about 4 to 5 moves a day. That's where you get peak performance in practically every parameter that you want to look at. And that's where we also optimize net profitability. So that 4 to 5 moves a day for these high performance animals. Now, do we have to do this with every class of animal every day? No. But when you've got peak producing animals, this is critical because it's all about the amount of dry matter they can take in every day to achieve that level of performance, whether we're talking about finishing a beef animal to a high degree of finish, or we're talking about producing milk and milk components out of a dairy cow. It doesn't matter. It's the same nutritional requirements. So this is really beneficial. And again, there's nothing hard about this. This is pretty easy to do. You can even employ, automated fence lifters or bat latches or whatever, to do this for you. So if you look at the pictures on the right-hand side of the slide, the same paddock that Kent is standing in, and those pictures were taken after the graze. Okay, and those are intact red-winged blackbird nests. Okay, and we have seen this over and over, and with ground nesting birds like quail and grouse and prairie chicken and so forth. Our cattle leave these nests alone, even at higher stock densities. They understand how to recognize where these nests are, and they just go around them and preserve them. So they're not destroying ground nesting bird habitat. They're making it better. What in the heck do ground nesting birds do when we have the massive herds of bison and elk and antelope? We had more ground nesting birds then than we can even come close to having today. And they moved about under high density. So it's all about recognition. And we have found these cows recognize these nests and move around them. And it's amazing once you start doing this and you see that behavior out of these animals. Another thing that the dairy here in Cold Spring, Minnesota is doing is winter stockpile grazing of their dry cows and their developing heifers. So these are the dries and the heifers out grazing winter stockpile. This is a warm season annual planting. It was a diverse mix of warm season annuals that were planted, that prior May, and they were allowed to stockpile. He did take, a couple of grazings that summer on them, but then they were allowed to stockpile for winter stockpile grazing. And by the way, we have found RFQ values in testing it as it looks in these pictures, okay, exceeding 170 to 180. Okay, so this is good feed. This is really good feed. So he was out grazing with no other supplementation. No hay, no baleage, no silage, anything like that. This is what they were getting. And look at their body condition. So they were doing quite well here in Minnesota, grazing on this. And here's some of the benefits. So no supplement at all was supplied to these girls other than salt. And most of the time they were watering on the snow. He didn't have to worry that much about getting water to them. They were watering on the snow. The cost per head per day was 62 cents. Okay, counting labor, seed, planting, fencing, so on and so forth. 62 cents per head per day to get them through the winter like this. All the neighboring dairy farms, we looked at their cost, and by the way, they're located in the largest dairy county in the state of Minnesota, Stearns County. And neighboring dairy farms, their average cost per head per day to maintain their heifers on a TMR with bunk feeding inside exceeded $4 per head per day. So this is a massive difference. So again, he was grazing the heifers and the dries 24/7 into early February. And then once the stockpile ran out, he started bale grazing them. So we didn't bring them in even at that point. He bale grazed them. So think of all the other cost savings that he experienced. He didn't have any pen cleaning for the winter, no feed mixing, no TMRs to mix up, no manure management. He didn't have to crank a tractor or a feed truck every day. And the animals were far healthier, and they were developing very superior epigenetics. This is some of the watering strategies that he utilizes. So you see the reel there. You can take this is flat, irrigation hose that you see here that's easy to work with and reel up. So they fabricated these reels themselves. They're easy to pick up and carry around, but yet they're very sturdy. You can use a cordless reel to quickly reel up, your irrigation hose that you're using to supply water to the water troughs. And he just uses very cheap water troughs, as you can see here. He just takes, plastic barrels, cuts them in half, puts a Job high flow valve on them, and off you go. And it's easy to water the whole herd that way. So with the bale grazing, he was putting out 5 days of bales at a time. Okay, so he didn't have to go out and put out bales every day. He was saving a minimum of 4 hours of labor and tractor time a week, a minimum of $320 per week in feeding costs. Again, no manure handling, no pen cleaning, no bedding cost, and the animal health was outstanding. And here they are out bale grazing in the middle of the winter after the winter stockpile played out. So, and then you'll see the aftermath that was left after that bale grazing. So a lot of carbon, a lot of manure, a lot of urine that's going to feed the spring growth when he goes back out again. So let's look at the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. They are the rule of compounding, the rule of diversity, and the rule of disruption. Now, the rule of compounding. So, well, first, let me say this. No matter what you're grazing, it doesn't matter the species or the combination of species, these 3 rules apply, okay? So the rule of compounding, first and foremost, there never are any singular effects, period, okay? Everything that we do, every management decision that we make or don't make creates a series of compounding, cascading effects. And these effects are never neutral, they're either positive or negative. And this even applies to epigenetic effects. Okay, so that's a rule of compounding. The rule of diversity. We want diversity. Everywhere that nature has control, you see complexity, diversity, and abundance. And, man is the only creature that creates a monoculture. So we want highly diverse and complex pastures and annual mixes, not monocultures or even low diversity. And unfortunately, way too many people today have either monoculture pastures or low diversity pastures. And we not only want diversity in terms of individual plant species, but we want diversity in plant functional group. And this is just as important and probably even more important. So we got to think about the functional groups. I want all the major functional groups represented, and they are grasses, legumes, forbs, or broadleaves, and even brushy species, woody species. And I like to have all 4 of those, okay, to be very honest with you, because they perform vital roles. But I want to see at least grasses, legumes, and forbs in my pastures. So why complexity and diversity? Because they create positive compounding cascading effects. We get a whole host of beneficial phytonutrients, what we call secondary and tertiary compounds, the work of Dr. Fred Provenza and Stefan Van Vliet and others. We also see a diversity of microbial species, a diversity of macroorganisms, and these benefits from enhanced diversity create exponential rather than linear impacts. Now, I want to address just very quickly what we call forbs and what many of you and many people in agriculture call weeds, okay? So how do you define a weed? I always ask this question, and we ask this everywhere we go in the world, not just here in the US, and we get the exact same definitions over and over. They may be a plant out of place, a plant I don't want, an invasive or whatever. But the fact of the matter is there is no such thing as an objective definition of a weed. The definition of a weed is purely subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder what a weed is. If you're growing corn, anything growing in that field besides corn, you define as a weed. But if it were in a pasture, you may think, wow, this is wonderful, and my cattle really love this. So we've got a lot of plants that we call weeds that actually have high nutrient benefit, medicinal benefit, and anti-parasitic benefit. And guess what? Our livestock will eat them and eat them very readily if we just train them to do so and introduce them to the fact that these plants are, by the way, edible. Okay. So what we have to ask ourselves is, what is nature trying to tell me? When we see any type of plant that we deem a weed growing, it's never nature's fault. Okay. And nature didn't put it there to aggravate us and disturb us and to make us mad. Nature's growing that plant at that particular point in time from the seed bank that's already in the soil. Okay. Nature's growing that plant to repair something that we did. And that's what we have to understand. So we always have to ask ourselves, if we see a plant growing that we think we don't want or don't desire, we caused it, not nature. So we have to ask ourselves, what did I do in my management to create that situation? And then what can I do to alleviate this situation? So there's several books that tell us the benefits, particularly the medicinal and anti-parasitic and phytonutrient benefits of many of these plants, and tell us why they're growing there. What are the problems that they're trying to correct? Okay, and three of those books are Weeds and What They Tell Us, Weeds, Guardians of the Soil, and Weeds, Control Without Poison. And we have these listed on our website as well at understandingag.com. So diversity is key. That's what we want. That's what we desire. So we manage for diversity, and frankly, we don't sweat the plants that many call weeds. Now, this is a list of plants that are growing on our farm. Okay. And I've now documented more than 150 different plant species growing in our pastures. I want that diversity. Now, if you look at this list, you'll see that we have not only individual plant species diversity, but we also have plant functional group diversity. Okay. Now, you may look at this list and you say, oh my God, Alan's got a ton of weeds. Oh, well, if you want to think that way, okay. But you know what? We have documented our livestock eating every single one of these. And this diversity is something we absolutely want, and we continue to encourage it and to grow it because our livestock never get sick. Okay. And they perform at a very high level because they get this highly diverse diet that has those medicinal, anti-parasitic properties and loaded with phytonutrients. And oh, by the way, because we produce a lot of different types of pasture proteins, this level of diversity imparts incredible flavor profiles that our customers absolutely love. Low diversity, lower flavor profile. Bottom line, you can't escape it. You cannot escape it. Okay. Higher diversity, far better flavor profile. And I know what a lot of you dairy folks are thinking right now. We can talk about that in our discussion. Okay. So here we go. A lot of these plants we call weeds or undesirables. Look at some of the nutritive value. Crude protein, in vitro dry matter digestibility, pretty darn good. Okay. A lot better than the things we purposely plant. Okay. Again, nutritional value of plants that we think we don't want. So the third rule. So we have the rule of compounding, the rule of diversity. Now the third rule, the rule of disruption. And we're going to spend the rest of our time on this. Okay. Nature has tremendous resilience and responds well to challenges. Therefore, we can introduce what we call planned purposeful disruptions to keep progress going, to keep nature exploding in diversity and productivity. By introducing planned purposeful disruptions, we create a whole host of positive compounding effects. Now, let me give you a way to think about this that you can relate to. So if you think about a human athlete, And an athlete that wants to compete at a very high level, that wants to compete for championships, world championship, or even compete in the Olympics, if they do the same exercise routine at the same duration and intensity, day in and day out, year in and year out, guess what? They will never be a superior athlete ever. They can't, because they're never challenging their body and their mind. Okay. They're just doing the same thing over and over. It becomes repetitive. And quickly you hit a wall, your progress stops. Okay. Then you start going backwards because you're prescriptive. You're doing the same thing every day, every month, every year. You're prescriptive. So you can't make any more progress. So how do athletes continue to make progress? Well, by routinely introducing planned, purposeful disruptions into their exercise routine to keep their body responding, to keep their mind responding. We're biology. And if our biology responds that way to planned, purposeful disruptions, why do we think the biology out on our farms does not respond the same way? It does. It does. So we need to introduce planned, purposeful disruptions and not get prescriptive out there. So how do we do that? Well, flexibility is key. Okay. Do not do things the same way every time. But, that's a human tendency, isn't it? We are creatures of habit. We want a routine. Many times we feel comfortable in a routine and we just start doing things the exact same way every day, every year. And, initially when we make a change, so we may make a change, we may introduce a disruption, and you may not call it that and even realize that it is that, but it is. So you may change something and you note an improvement. Okay. But then what's your human tendency? It's to say, oh boy, I changed from that to this. This gave me a bump. So now I'm going to do it that way every time, right? That's how we think. And so you introduce a disruption, but then you turn the disruption into a prescription. And you think that you're going to continue to make progress by doing it that way now, from now on. But what happens? And this is inevitable. You hit the next one, okay? And you can't move past that. And then you start going backwards and you wonder why. Well, boy, this worked. And now 3 years later, it's no longer working for me. What in the heck happened? Okay. Well, what happened is you turned it into a prescription rather than a disruption. So adaptive management is not a rigid routine, recipe, or formula. And again, the moment you make it that, you are no longer adaptive, you're no longer regenerative, okay? So the question becomes, how can we be disruptive? So here we go. Now, this is not the definitive list, but these are some of the key things that we can do in introducing disruptions in our grazing. Number one, alter stock densities. I call it pulsing a stock density. Don't keep your cows or your sheep or whatever you're grazing at the same stock density all the time. That's a prescription, not a disruption. And everything will become used to that and your progress will stop. It'll just flat out tank, okay? Do not move through rotations in the same pattern. This is another habit we get in. Every spring, you start in the same pasture and move through the same rotational pattern around your farm. And you do it the next year and the next year and the next year. Start in different pastures each year, okay? Alternate grazing heights on and off. Now, if you're a mid-grazer, you're thinking, wow, I can't do that. That's going to mess me up. No, it's going to straighten you out, okay, to be honest with you. So alternate grazing heights on and off. Alter rest periods. This is another key mistake we make. We're too routine on this. I got to come around every 21 days, every 30 days, every 40 days, whatever the case may be. And I just got to do that, right? Well, you're not going to make progress. And you're going to hamper your diversity in everything. Diversity in microbes, diversity in plant species, diversity in beneficial insects, and performance of livestock. You're going to hamper all of that, okay? So you got to intentionally alter rest periods. If you're doing multiple species like we do, so we do cattle, we do sheep, we have pigs, we have chickens and broilers, you name it. And so alter the species order from time to time that you're moving them through a pasture, okay? Alter the time of season and even time of year a paddock is grazed. Also alter the total number of grazing days on a paddock in any given year. Alter paddock configuration. A square paddock, even at the same stock density and same duration of grazing, does not produce the same impact as a long rectangular paddock. Okay, so the configuration of the paddock absolutely matters in terms of the performance and the benefits that we anticipate we're going to see. So routinely alter paddock configuration and paddock direction. You know, if we're routinely, our paddocks are east to west, you know, next year in that same field, make them north to south. It does matter. All of these things matter, and they make a profound difference. Planned burns can be a part of your planned disruptions. Leader follower. We do this quite a bit, and we may use different species to do this. So for instance, we may move sheep through first, then cattle, or vice versa. Or a lot of times we'll use our finishing herd, we call it a mob, our finishing mob, and move them first ahead of the main mob that's comprised of cows, calves, yearlings, and all of that. So leader follower. But then the other thing that we can do is we can take all of these individual disruptions that are listed here and we can combine them together. So I can have a whole host of iterations of combined disruptions. So for instance, I can alter stock density, alter paddock configuration, and I can alter the grazing height on and off and alter the rest period, okay, all in the same graze. So now I've got 4 different disruptions that I'm combining in a single event. Those are very powerful. They create very profound results if we do this correctly. So this is a video on our farm in Alabama, and we're on what's called the Black Belt Prairie, and we can have species such as ash and cedar and honey locust growing vibrantly there, and they'll try to take over. So this is a patch of ash and honey locust and cedar that we put 1 million pounds of cows through, okay, for about an hour. So it's 1 million pounds per acre, all right, stock density, 1 million pounds per acre. And when we started this was in May that we did this. When we started this, you couldn't see through this. It was so dense and thick, there was no way to even see through all of this brush and these trees growing here. And in just an hour with 1 million pounds per acre in a long, narrow paddock, we were able to significantly clear it out. And you see now sunlight can get down. Do we still have trees and stuff there? Yeah, we do. But you can see that we can now get a lot of sunlight down through those trees and that canopy. And by August of that year, we had another incredible graze. The grass just exploded up underneath those trees. And we do this 2 or 3 times in a row. And now the cattle start to control the trees and even kill the trees. So we can do a lot of brush management. And we've got, you know, brush management webinars on our website that go into this in a lot more detail. So they're archived and you're welcome to view those. This is a dairy in Pennsylvania. And they hosted a Soil Health Academy with us. But one of the things that I had them do, the academy was in September of that year. And I had them intentionally take a section, a paddock that they just polywired off that was in the middle of a pasture, not on an edge, okay? And I intentionally wanted them to do this in the middle, not on an edge. And I just had them paddock it off and not graze it for that entire grazing season, okay? Until we had the academy in September. Because I wanted them to see what would grow, what would happen with biomass, what would happen with soil health, aggregation, plant species diversity, insect diversity, and so forth. So they did this. And this is what it looked like during the academy in September before it was grazed, okay? So many of you may look at this and say, oh my God, Alan, this is too tall, too mature. What a waste. I can't believe you had them do that. You know, why would you do that? But as we did this and we went out, we wanted them to look at it in the paddocks on either side in that same pasture. They grazed in more of what they would call their normal rotation that year. So we had that direct comparison on either side of this. And you can see it right there in the picture on the right-hand side. So here's what happened, okay? So we had 3.5 times the forage dry matter biomass, okay, growing there by September versus all of the other paddocks. So this grew 3.5 times more than the other paddocks did all growing season because of what we did here, letting it rest. The plant bricks averaged, higher in this at that stage, okay? And this is what shocked many of the farmers that were there in viewing this. They thought this would be just very low nutritive value and you had nothing but junk out there. And again, it was a waste of good forage. But the plant bricks actually averaged higher than the much more immature forage on either side of it, okay? The degree of soil aggregation was significantly greater in this paddock because why? Because we had more microbial diversity, more mycorrhizal fungi colonization here, more biotic glues being exuded and gluing these soil particles together, and roots going much deeper in the ground. So this area was able to infiltrate water very, very rapidly with any rainfall. There was also a significant increase in plant species diversity and morphology. The leaves on the grasses and the forbs were much bigger, much longer, and much broader than the exact same plants on either side of this exclusion, okay? So just in a single growing season, the impact of added biology significantly altered the morphology of that plant for the better. And they actually held off and didn't graze this until December of this year. And they were able to get significant grazing out of it. So here's that same dairy farm, and they had a winter rainstorm in February of last year. And, this rainstorm caught them by surprise. Again, it was in the middle of the winter. They didn't have snow and the ground wasn't frozen. They had their cows under sort of a higher density, and they were afraid that the cows being caught in this winter rainstorm had destroyed their field. And here's what it looked like. So yeah, it looks like it was destroyed. And they called me up shortly after this happened and said, well, what do we do? What do we do? Do I need to go in and disc this and reseed it? If I do, what do I seed it in? What do we do here? I said, leave it alone. Do nothing. Leave it alone. And that's what they did. And again, this is what it looked like. Okay. But that next growing season, this is what it looked like. It absolutely exploded. Okay. So you just had phenomenal growth occurring due to that unplanned. That was an unplanned disruption, but we had phenomenal growth occurring after that. A few more examples, and I'm going to open it up to questions and discussion. This is at the Birdwell Clark Ranch out in Henrietta, Texas. Again, one of the clients that we're working with. What you're seeing here is a mob of over 6,000 stocker calves, okay? And they run them all together in a single mob, and they move these stocker calves, 6,000 of them, okay? They move them every day under a single strand of polywire, temporary paddocks, a minimum of 4 times a day, and sometimes up to 6 times a day. So the entire mob is moving across their landscape as a single unit, again, 4 to 6 times a day. Believe it or not, this mob, once these calves get used to this, and these are put together, aggregated stocker calves, these weren't born and raised on this ranch. Okay, so they're all brought in from many, many different other ranches, and then they learn how to do this really quickly. And this is what they're watered out of. So everything is portable water. This is the water trough that is used to water 6,000 head of stocker calves, even in a hot Texas summer. Okay, He's got a 3-inch pipe that comes in to feed this with high flow valves, and no problem at all watering this many head out of this water trough, even in the heat, of Texas. So this is at the Noble Research Institute. We've done a lot of work with them and trained all of their personnel. This is 1 million pounds per acre. In this area here, they had a lot of plants they wanted to control. You see a lot of thistle there. They had buckbrush, they had blackberry thistle, things like that. So we're implementing 1 million pounds per acre stock density to effect control of those problem plants. This is in South Dakota, one of our clients. This is about 4,000 head of bison under a single strand of polywire being moved daily. So again, we can do this with any species, even bison. And look, I'll be very honest with you. We were told point blank by bison ranchers, you can't do this with bison. You can't put bison under a single strand of polywire. They'll never even know it's there and they'll never respect it. Well, here we go. And we're doing this on dozens of bison ranches now, not just this one. Okay. So we can do it with bison. We can do it with any species. If I want high stock density impact, here's chickens on our farm. Okay. These are laying hens. 5,000 laying hens. Boy, do they impact a high stock density. So, I can get a great high stock density impact, biological application, fertility application by moving these chickens around, on a daily basis. Again, I showed you this one up in Minnesota, and the significant impact, that's occurring there with the daily moves of their lactating dairy cows. And then I want to end with this. So let's go to a really difficult situation. Okay, let's go to the Chihuahuan Desert of Mexico. And so this is in the state of Chihuahua, northern Mexico, and this is what the Chihuahuan Desert looks like from mile after mile after mile. This is the typical scene, many of the ranchers down there are requiring 200, 300 acres to support a single cow. Okay. And if you look at this picture, you can see why. But yet it wasn't always like that. So a lot of people think that the desert in the Western US and the Southwest US and in Mexico was always abject desert. No, it was not. That's not the historical context of it. And that picture that you just saw earlier. So I'm going to flip back to it. Okay. This picture, that same ranch, okay, was where this picture was taken in 1865. Okay. This is a band of Apache warriors. All right. Look at the grass that they're standing in. And it was already depleted by then. But even by then, it still had far more grass. And look, you don't see any bare ground here. It's all covered, in grass up to their knees. So we got to look at historical context and take that into consideration. So let's look at that ranch again, the Las Damas Ranch, okay, and where they are today. This is what the Las Damas looks like today. None of this was planted. None of this was irrigated. None of this was fertilized, okay? This is all latent seed bank with the only tools being livestock, water, and water for them to drink, not irrigation water, and temporary fencing and herding. That's it, okay? So just using the livestock as a land management and soil building tool. And this is in the summer of 2018. They got 6 inches of rain for the whole year. Okay. And so down here in the Chihuahuan Desert, it's, average is about 8 inches of rain a year. And that's a total precip. In 18, they got 6 inches for the whole year. This is what the neighboring ranch looked like after the 6 inches of rain. This is what the Las Damas Ranch looked like after the same 6 inches of rain. Now, what happened? They got the same amount of moisture. This ranch could infiltrate it and use it, capture it, keep it. The other ranch ran off and evaporated. They couldn't control it, couldn't keep it. Let's look at a progression on the Las Damas. Now, they started this in 2012, so even this pasture here has been improved since 2012. But pay attention to this time progression, Okay. Now look at the red arrow. That's a mesquite in the background, and look at the mountain topography in the background. You'll see it in all pictures. So we took every picture at the same orientation. Okay. But 2015, 2018, oops, and 2021. Okay. Isn't that phenomenal? And that's in the middle of a desert with no more than 8 inches of rain a year on average. And that's the progress that was made in that time period. The person you see standing there is one of my partners in Understanding Ag, Shane New. This is on the Las Tamas, September 2021. Now, they did get 10 inches of rain that year, but this is what resulted. And guess what? The neighboring ranches look just like they always do. They didn't change. They didn't see anywhere near this type of growth, even with the 10 inches. But 10 inches of rain produced this on the Las Tamas because of their adaptive stewardship practices and their regenerative principles that they were implementing. So the last thing I'm going to share with you is this, and we'll open it up to questions. But here's sort of a bottom line, folks, is that we've got to think about what we're doing with every graze that we take. If we allow our livestock to consume up to 50% of the leaf volume of our plants in a single grazing event, and no more, okay, we only have about 2 to 4% root growth stoppage. All right. But if we allow them to consume just another 10%, and to us visually, we think, well, that's nothing. Going from 50% to 60%, that can't make any difference in the world. Well, yeah, it does. You go from 50 to 60, you jump all the way up to 50% root growth stoppage. And then you go up to 80%, and you jump all the way up to 100% root growth stoppage. So folks, this makes a major, major difference. And I want to end with this, for us to change what we're doing. And I know that many of you listening today are implementing a lot of regenerative practices already. But for anybody to make a transition in what they're doing, it takes incentive, right? We gotta have some type of incentive. And it's sort of like a buddy of mine in Mississippi that loves to fish. Okay. And every moment he gets that he can be out on the river or lake fishing, he's going to be out there. So, last month he went out fishing, and he found a nice warm December day and went out fishing, and he was having really good luck. The fish were biting well, so well that he ran out of bait, and he didn't want to go back home. So he started looking around for what he could use for bait, and he happened to see this old cottonmouth moccasin snake up on the bank of that lake with a frog in his mouth. He had just caught a frog. And my buddy thought, you know what, I can use that frog as bait. So he eased the bow of his boat up over that snake and reached down and grabbed that snake behind the head, pulled him into the boat, yanked the frog out of his mouth, and dropped the frog in his bait bucket. And then he realized he was looking at a very angry snake. He didn't know how he was going to let that snake go without him biting him. So he then remembered that bottle of Jack Daniels he always carries with him fishing. So he reached down, he grabbed that bottle of Jack Daniels, and he poured some down that snake's gullet. And it wasn't long before that old snake's eyes rolled back in his head and his whole body went limp, and he just tossed him out in the water. Well, he reached down, grabbed that frog, baited his hook, commenced to fishing again, didn't think about that snake anymore. And so he started fishing, and then he felt a nudge at his foot. And he looked down, and there was that same snake with 2 more frogs in his mouth. So it's all about incentive. It's all about incentive. And the one thing that we have discovered, I talked about quality of life earlier. We have a ton of fun now. This is fun. And quality of life is all about enjoying yourself, enjoying what you do. And yes, being out of debt, making a good net profit, and being able to support your family, and being able to get your family involved with what you're doing. And that's what we do. So to us, this is not a chore. This is not a burden. This is fun. This is huge quality of life that is returned to us. And so I thank you very much. I'm going to stop there, and I really want to hear any questions, comments, whatever.
Thank you so much, Alan. So if you want to turn your, there you go. Yeah. So yeah, give a little stretch. Let's get into questions here. Folks have got a number of things. I think a lot of them relate to, our context being smaller scale, smaller acreage,
Yep.
higher, more seasonality for sure, higher winter costs, and again, sort of just reiterating that, like, probably much smaller size and scale. So one of the first questions that has come in with a high vote, so folks do vote on those questions, remember to do that, was, about altering your management to mitigate that impact of not having the animal diversity. So, a lot of people, there's also this question, like, sometimes diversity can be too hard for a farm to manage, or, can actually be problematic for this, or detrimental to the farm. So is there a way to mitigate, and I'm talking, you spent your life learning how to raise cattle, or, be a dairy farmer. Is there a way to mitigate the impact of not having the large animal diversity?
So, first and foremost, we work with farmers of all sizes. So we've got many clients that are smaller acres, smaller farms. And obviously we've worked in, like I said, all 50 US states, Canada, everywhere. So we're very used to working in every environment, every climate, and every situation. So that's nothing new at all. So these same principles and same rules apply no matter your size. The size does not impact these at all. It just impacts how you implement them on your operation. And what I would say, so let's say that you're a smaller dairy operator. Maybe you have 40 cows, 50 cows, 80 cows. Okay. Then that does not mean that you can't have other species on those exact same acres. And that's the way a lot of people think, well, I can't have anything else out there because I've got my dairy cows out there. Well, why can't you? For instance, you can have a pasture poultry operation. You could have some sheep out there because they utilize plants differently, and they utilize different plants, and they complement each other quite well. For instance, one of the things is sheep and cattle are dead-end hosts to each other's primary parasites. Okay, so you can help mitigate parasite issues by having those two, run together. It's easy to do pasture poultry and cattle. And pasture poultry provide a ton of fertility and nitrogen, to my pastures. And so they're not going to take up and take away and reduce what I have available for my cattle. They're going to greatly expand, what I have available for my cattle to graze, not reduce it. So oftentimes we limit ourselves in the way that we're thinking, and crop producers do the same way, right? We have a lot of row crop producers that think, well, if I plant cover crops, they're going to rob moisture and nutrients from my cash crop. Well, no, if you're doing this right, not at all. They add moisture and add nutrients to your cash crop. They feed the cash crop and benefit the cash crop. So, again, if it's a smaller operation and you use the dairy, if you're a smaller dairy, you absolutely can graze your lactating cows. Okay. Now we work with, again, everywhere from small dairies to mid-sized to very large dairies. And the very large dairies, they can't graze lactating cows. They just can't do it. Right. And we all understand why. But if you're a small dairy, you absolutely can graze. And there's really not a reason that you can't, at least at certain periods of the year. And those cows benefit a lot from that grazing, and so does your soil, and so does your plant species diversity. But if you just say, well, I don't want to do that, I don't want to graze my lactating cows, then you've got heifers, you've got dries, Okay. And you can bring in other species. So you've always got some species or class of animal you can graze and get the benefit on your land. If you're growing crops, you've got periods that you can graze. You plant cover crops in between the cash crops or the feed crops, and then use livestock impact to graze and get added biology, added fertility, on that land. So there's, yeah, but you've got to be cognizant of how you're grazing. And again, those rest periods, the stock densities that you're using, and the disruptions, that we talked about, because to benefit your dairy cows the most, if you're a dairy or any livestock species, this is not just dairy. The more diversity you can have out there in plant species, the better they're going to perform, the better your soil's going to perform, and the healthier they are going to be. You can't dispute that. That is an absolute fact. And so, if you're not really understanding how to do that, we need to work within your individual context, because I've got to know a lot more about what the individual farmer is already doing and has been doing in their history. So I'm giving you more general answers because I have to, but what my invitation would be, if you're an individual dairy producer and you want to present a specific contextual situation to me, please feel free to do so, either through the app, okay, or by emailing me at alan@understandingag.com. So feel free to do that. And I will be very, very happy to go through that contextual context with you and look at what planned purposeful disruptions fit you. What can you do specifically on your farm?
So I do have one question kind of on that continuum, which
Yep.
relates to like the high labor cost of rotating multiple times a day or having multiple species. Have you seen some interesting models potentially where there are other people who are taking on those activities, or how a farm makes that kind of shares that labor cost of getting some of that diversity onto their farms in new ways?
Yeah. So one thing is, and again, remember, I do this. Okay. If we want to talk about high labor requirement, oh, absolutely not. It isn't. We think in our minds that it is. Okay. But what we're doing is we're transferring one thing that we used to do that we no longer have to do to this. Okay. For instance, the example of the Minnesota dairy that I gave you, again, they don't have hired labor. This is just a family. Okay. And that's it. They don't have any outside labor on that farm. And they're the ones that move those cows, every day, 4 times a day. And they love it. They absolutely, that's one of the husband, wife, 2 kids, and they do it together. And they absolutely love it. And when they're out grazing, see, think about the things they're not having to do. Okay. So the cows aren't up. So they're not having to clean pens. They're not having to mix TMR rations and feed those out in bunks. They're not having to do all that manure management. That because the manure is being applied by the cows out on the fields where they need it, as they need it. And so think about all the things they're now not doing. And so that labor requirement is no longer there. And they're substituting that with the labor that they're now using to go out and to move the cows. Okay. Now, however, that being said, okay, we on our farm, because we do multiple species and we do larger scale, we've got a lot of people hired, but we can afford it and we pay them very well. So we don't hesitate if we're going to add a new livestock species enterprise or whatever. We do not even hesitate to hire somebody to manage that, or hire somebody within family or outside of family, either one, to manage that, because it makes money and it's symbiotic. It helps every other enterprise. So don't hesitate to go out and hire outside help when you add an enterprise, because that enterprise, if you operate it correctly, is going to be profitable, and it's going to make your other prior existing enterprises more profitable and more productive as well. So don't limit yourself in terms of the way you're thinking about labor and labor allocations and people and that kind of thing. It's not hard to solve those problems. And for instance, even so, if you have a smaller herd and you say, well, I really want to be doing other things and I don't want to be moving them every day. Well, we've done a host of things. For instance, hiring, high school kids, okay, to move them, homeschool kids that need a little job and cash flow to move them. A lot of our clients are using retired people that don't want to just sit around and they want something to do and they love it. They absolutely love coming out 2, 3, 4 hours a day to just move cattle, And again, the other thing I mentioned, you can have automated lifters or bat latches or whatever that you can pre-build paddocks, and then you can go do other things and the livestock move themselves. So again, there's a whole host of ways to get around this labor deal that people tends to encumber them and keep them not thinking about the things that they can do.
Yeah, I was thinking too about some models that we're seeing happening here, and I saw it out in California with Lauren Poncha, the idea of allowing somebody else to have that enterprise on your land. Talk about land access, like opening your space up. If you want to have chickens, maybe somebody in your area would have a chicken enterprise on your farm or something like that. And I'm assuming you were seeing these models. We're seeing it grow here a little bit and seeing them grow across the country.
Megan, that's really an excellent point that you bring up. And Lauren happens to be one of our clients. Okay. We work with him for quite a few years now. And, but yes, you're absolutely right. We're even helping facilitate matching up people like that. So it's a great way for young people to get into farming, right? Where they don't have to incur the costs and expenses of buying land or even, paying a steep rental fee for the land or anything like that. But you can trade some labor, for the use of another farmer's land. And so you can put in sheep or pastured pigs or chickens or whatever on their land. They don't have to manage it, but they get the benefit of it, right? And you're not having to pay a lease fee because you're providing the benefit of those enterprises to that farmer. And then in exchange for running your own enterprises, you're also moving their cows. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're exactly right. We have numerous incidences of that, and that is actually growing and becoming a lot more popular. And we see a lot of landowners that are latching onto that and giving young people that opportunity.
It might be a class we'll have to do that, sort of like how to be a good, host for other enterprises, because I imagine that's also a very tricky kind of relationship to manage. So moving on to the next question, one of the things that we're sort of pressed to do a lot is kind of benchmarking or measuring our growth, our change, are we doing a better job? Sometimes that's for grant purposes or, project purposes. But one of the question comes in about measuring biodiversity. And I think, like, are there tools that you use, like if we were actually going to measure one farm against another farm, or ways that we would do that?
Yeah. So we do that. Okay. And pretty much everybody that we work with, we do that. And there are several ways that we're capturing, this increase in biodiversity and being able to quantify it and verify it. So first and foremost, again, we look at beneath the soil and the biodiversity there, the microbial species diversity. And so we use the PLFA test for that. Okay. You can also use genomic testing, metagenomic testing to do that, but the PLFA is a lot cheaper. It doesn't give you as broad a spectrum, but it definitely gives you a very good idea of how well you're increasing diversity. So we do that a lot, monitor that. Then we set up transects. on the farms. And then we monitor along the transects, and the things that we monitor are plant species diversity, insect species diversity, including pollinators, and bird species diversity. And the bird species diversity is actually not hard to do. You have apps that allow you to do this, from audible sounds of the birds, right? So it works very well. So there's a whole host of ways that we can do that. But those transects and the PLFA tests are two of the key ways to do that. And what we typically see is that there is a rapid in the first 3 years of adoption. Okay, when you're intentionally implementing these principles and rules, the first 3 years we are laying the foundation, and we build the base for an explosion of diversity. So by year 3, we see significantly higher diversity in all of these categories versus year 1. And then year 4, year 5, year 6, it just continues to increase incrementally after that.
Awesome. So thinking, kind of going back to that small scale, small size farms, and talking about being disruptive with low animal numbers and small acreage, can you just expand on that a little bit? Like, what are our opportunities to be disruptive, or some of the tools that we would use to do that with?
Yeah,
less
absolutely. So again, even with small animal numbers, you can still get higher stock densities. It's just, much smaller paddocks. Okay. So, I mean, when I have larger numbers of animals, obviously my paddocks are a lot bigger to get the same stock density, but it just means you have a lot smaller paddocks. And that's where, polywire comes in great, single-stranded polywire, tread-in post. We even run our sheep under single-stranded polywire. We've trained them to that. And our pigs are under a single-stranded polywire, so it doesn't take a lot here. So you can get higher stock densities even on a small farm with small acreage and small numbers. It doesn't matter in that regard. But some of the other things that you can do that I mentioned in terms of planned purposeful disruptions, a lot of times the smaller farms are the ones that are probably the most guilty of using the exact same rotation pattern every year, right? Mm-hmm. So, if you have 5 major pastures, for instance, okay, on your smaller farm, and you call them A, B, C, D, and E, and every spring after spring flush, you start in A and move C, D, and E, B, C, D, and E, then don't start in A this coming spring. Okay, go all the way to D or wherever and start. It really makes a profound difference. We, in a lot of people, even on today's session, may be thinking, well, Alan, come on, how in the world can it make a difference that I start in a different paddock this spring versus what I've been doing? Well, it does. And it's called cellular memory. Every microbe, every plant, even your livestock have cellular memory. And they remember what happened last year, the year before, the year before. And if you're doing it the same way, all of those cells in every organism are saying, this is no different. I don't have to become more resilient, stronger, or anything because I'm used to this. So just that one simple thing, do that this year, okay? Move in a different rotation pattern. Another thing on small acres, and this is very easy to do, alter paddock configuration, okay? So, and especially if you have smaller numbers, it's even more important. Long, narrow paddocks, okay? Not square. Too many people want to make their paddocks square. Well, why? Make them long and narrow. And even with smaller numbers, you've now concentrated them even more, and that trample impact and fertility and manure and urine application impact on that area. Okay, it's more concentrated, more favorable to you. So alter that paddock configuration. You can alter paddock direction. Okay, no matter how big you are, you can alter rest periods, no matter how big or small you are. Right. So a lot of these things you can do even on small acres, and you can do leader follower. So on small acres, if I have cattle and I have chickens, I can do leader follower. If I have sheep, I add sheep to that operation to complement my cows. Then I can do leader follower. So the disruptions aren't limited due to your size. You can implement any of them regardless, really, of your size.
Yeah, and so to that point, I think sometimes our infrastructure that we put in may limit our thoughts of being disruptive because our water gates are somewhere. So are there techniques that you have or ideas about how to set our infrastructure up to be more flexible?
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, it's easy to resolve water problems, especially on smaller acres. Okay. This is not difficult at all. And it doesn't mean putting up more permanent water infrastructure. Don't, as a matter of fact, do not do that. That's going to get in your way. Okay. And it's going to hamper what you can do. So it's far better to just wherever you currently have a permanent water source, put a quick coupler in there. Okay. And then you can attach, I think y'all saw the flat irrigation hose, that our dairy farmer in Minnesota is using. And many of our clients have gone to that now. And I like it too. We use it too, the flat hose. But you just couple that in at the coupler at your permanent water source. Okay. And now I can go out 100 foot, 200 foot, wherever, in any direction I want to go for that permanent water source, right? With that quick coupler. And I can alter where my troughs are located, right? Just portable troughs. And if you're a smaller operator, that portable trough is super easy to move because it's small. You don't need a big trough at all. 100, 150 gallons, all you need with a high flow valve, and you're good. Look at the size of the trough that our client in Texas, in a very hot environment, was watering 6,000 head out of. Okay. So we limit ourselves, I think. So above, on top of the ground, okay, on top of the ground pipe or hose, and just move it wherever you want. And don't put in more permanent. As a matter of fact, on our operation, and yes, we're a larger operation, but we never put in permanent water troughs anymore. As a matter of fact, I abhor them now, and I'll never put in more permanent troughs ever again. Every trough we have is temporary. We just simply put in risers with quick couplers and pop them in, and I can either locate a portable trough right at the riser if I want to, or I can go out with my hose or my pipe. See that ranch out in Texas that I told you about, running 6,000 plus head of stocker calves. Okay. Do you know how they get the water to those stocker calves? They're a 12,000 acre operation. You know how they get the water to them? They run 3-inch PEX pipe on top of the ground everywhere. Okay. They don't bury a bit of it. The only thing that's buried is to their main risers, and that's it. But they're running that out and quick coupling into that. So don't let water be a limiting resource to you at all. Just put in quick couplers with risers and use pipe or hose and run with it in portable troughs, and you solved your water problem. It's particularly on smaller acres. You have absolutely solved your water problem. And solar as well. Okay, we use a lot of solar pumps, and that's working very well for us also. So that's another option if you don't have electricity available to you.
Let's see, we're getting questions in fast and furious now. We're really getting rolling. There's been a long-standing question about sheep. The comment is sort of about their nutrient demand, related to cattle and I guess it sort of framed as, is it true that a ewe raising 2 lambs is going to need the same per pound as a dairy cow producing 20,000 pounds of milk? So I'm not sure what the question is in there, but what is your experience with sheep related to their nutrient intake on pastures? And and I also was thinking, I wanted to be able to give you an opportunity to go back to some of that, the nutrient content about forbs. I think that's really interesting and compelling. I think we, as so many other places, suffer from the grass and legume, pastures. So wherever you can go with that. And, go ahead, Alan.
Boy, we can go all day on that one. Okay. And then beyond. But I know we can't. So let me say this first, and then I want to answer your question. And this is going to be radical to many of you listening to me. All right. But it's true, and I can prove it. I've got the data to prove it. Okay. These forbs are absolutely vital to the health of our animals. All right. And when we have more forbs out there, then we have a lot better health profile, lifetime health profile than we do with high legume. All right. Did you hear that? We've got way, way too many grazers, folks. You got way too many legumes in your pastures, period. And I've got the data to prove that these high legume pastures are detrimental lifetime to the health of your livestock. Okay. They're not doing what you think they're doing, folks. They're actually creating problems. You're just not attributing those problems to the legumes. Okay. Now, I don't have time to cover all that today, but if you want to know, again, we've monitored this globally, not just here in the US, but globally. And it's the same way everywhere you go. And oh, by the way, those high legumes are also not good for your soil and your soil microbial population. Okay. There's a lot of problems with high legume pastures, and we have been taught and trained. And look, I was there too. I'm a former Durham University professor, and I believe that as well. And I advocated that and taught that, and I did that, okay, on my own farm at that point in time. So high legumes are more of a detriment than they are a benefit. And again, we've got the evidence to prove that pretty definitively. So to that being said, sheep, here's the rule of thumb, okay? I can add 1 ewe per mature cow without having to destock any cows because of the differences in the way that they eat and what they eat, okay? So I can add 1 ewe per mature cow without having to destock any cows whatsoever, all right? That's a general rule of thumb, and that works. It absolutely works. So if you don't want to destock any cows, you got 40 cows, you can have 40 ewes. And you're not going to take away from availability of what your cows need because they eat very differently. But now you can't be grazing conventionally, okay? Mm-hmm. You got to be grazing adaptively for that to work. But you don't have to change anything else other than grazing adaptively versus conventionally. And you can add 1 ewe for every cow, all right? And as I said, they're very complementary to each other in what they eat. The impact on your pastures and your landscape is very complementary. You add an additional revenue stream that you didn't have on the exact same acres, and you're not taking away from your cows, but you're adding an additional revenue stream, just like you do with the poultry. And they are dead-end hosts to each other's primary parasites. So now I don't have to deworm anymore, okay? I can totally take that out of my equation. And if I'm not chemically deworming, what are the benefits there? To the microbes in my soil, to my earthworms, to my dung beetles, and other beneficial insect populations that the dewormers are killing, okay, and harming significantly. So now I have more life everywhere else as well that's benefiting me, okay? So sheep are easy to move in with your cows. I mean, that's sort of a natural add that you don't even have to worry about, to be quite honest with you, and because they're just so darn complementary.
Are you meaning literally like the flirt idea, like you're putting them in with the cattle, or separate?
You can do it
or both, either.
You want to do it, okay? And look, this is how we think about it, okay? Every species of life, and again, remember, we've got multiple species on our farms, right? So every species that we have is not just a revenue generator, but they are also a tool for me to use to build my biology, to build my soil, to build my diversity. Okay. They're a tool. So there are times we do it all. So there are times when our sheep are running with our cattle in a flock, times, but not all the time, not 100% of the time. Okay. There are times when I need my sheep over here and my cattle over here. And I'm going to do that because they're a tool. Don't get confined in your thinking, you know. So the people that say, well, I've got to run them together all the time or separate all the time. Well, why? Why? They're a tool. Use them that way. So there's times we run them together. There's times we run them apart. There's times that they may be on opposite ends of the farm. And there's times when they may not be together, but they're leader follower. And all of that is intentional. We actually have thought through why we're doing either one of those at that particular point in time. We have a reason for doing that. It's not just haphazard. So yes, all of the above. Okay. And it works. It works very well. Now, what we find with the sheep, particularly running in a flood, is that they actually like being with the cows. Okay. And when the cows move, the sheep will move. And it's far easier to keep them under a single strand of polywire when you're moving them as a flood because they want to be with the cows. All right. And so the single strand works super well there because of that. So again, just think about what you're doing. And during the active growing season, that's when you're going to have the biggest parasite pressure, not in the winter, right? Now, I don't have winters that kill parasites. We got parasites, 365. Y'all don't.
We're not having one of those winters this year. We haven't gotten below freezing. I mean, it's so warm.
Yeah.
It's been a weird winter so far. But yes, you're right. We do. It will come.
Yeah. But so you benefit from that. So see, at that point in time, maybe you're not running the sheep with the cows, right? Because you don't have the parasite issue. But in the active grazing season, when you have the parasite issue or could have it, right, then running them together really helps, again, because they're dead in host.
Yeah, thanks. So there's a question about root growth stoppage. And the question is, would you say 40% graze is optimal? Obviously not all the time.
Yeah, so again, remember the rule of disruption, right? And there are times that we may take a graze that's more intense, but we're doing it intentionally. So there may be a time that I'm taking intentionally 80%, but I know what I'm doing. I know the time of the year that I'm doing it, and I know why I'm doing it. Okay. But I'm not doing that routinely. So routinely, here's what we do and what works best for us and also works best for the vast majority of our clients is that on most of your grazing events, we really only take about 30 to 40% of the total leaf volume and then move them on. And that really gives us the best results overall, not just in terms of root growth stoppage, which is important, but also in terms of increasing plant species diversity, plant root biomass and depth, and microbial benefit beneath the soil. We get far more nutrient cycling and soil aggregation when we're spending more time taking 30 to 40% versus 50, 60% or above. But in general, general rule of thumb, but again, remember, don't do this all the time because the rule of disruption is you can take up to 50% and not have a big issue. But again, when you go beyond that, that's where you really have an issue. And now that's another issue with these high lagoon pastures, okay? Because what do cattle tend to do in high lagoon pastures? You got patches that have more clover or whatever, and then some patches in that same pasture that have more grass. What are they going to do? They're going to go hit the clover and take it way down, right? And they're going to leave more grass, all right? And so that's not nature's fault. That's our fault. We created that situation. And that's another way that high legumes are detrimental to us, that the cattle, it's a very uneven graze in that paddock.
Yeah. They're heading for the cake. You want the cake?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But they
Um,
don't, okay. Now, Megan, that's an important point. So if we head for the cake every day and 3 meals a day we head for the cake, it tastes mighty good, but what are we doing?
yeah. Killing
We're
ourselves.
harming ourselves over time, aren't we? Okay. Your cattle heading for that cake, they're harming themselves over time. We're just not attributing the issues to that, but they are directly related back to that.
So this is a question about that field that you showed, that with the winter rain that got all plugged up and mudded up. And the question was just how long did it take for that field to grow back, and what did they do about changing how they grazed it the year that they were having it recover?
So good question. And the answer to that is this. So it happened in February. They got, and again, remember, this is Pennsylvania, okay, not Mississippi or Alabama where I live, but they grazed it again in late April. Okay, so they had them out there in February, right? But it had enough regrowth that they got to graze in April, in Pennsylvania. But they gave it longer rest periods than they might normally do through that year. So they gave it 60 plus days rest period. And then you saw the picture in September. So the bottom line is they did not lose any biomass production, grazable biomass production. They just altered the timing at which they might have grazed it otherwise. And the big benefit is that they not only did they get really good biomass production, they actually got more than they did the year prior. In spite of that event, they got more total forage biomass production, okay, because of the disruption. They had better soil aggregation and biological activity and nutrient cycling in that soil. And they saw a latent seed bank response. So their plant species diversity due to that disruption in February actually increased. There were at least 6 new plant species that were growing there, that their cattle were eating. So you got all of those benefits out of it that were compounding, cascading in a positive manner.
Awesome. So we'll see if this is our last question or not, but queuing up to the last couple of questions. Talk to me a little bit about adjustments in your soil. Like, do you use lime? Do you adjust for the pH? Are there things like that?
Okay, so again, very good question. And my response to that is we got to know a lot more about your individual context, because the question can lead to a prescriptive answer, and we never give prescriptive answers. Okay. So this is individual farm by farm. So let me give you an example. So let's say your soil pH is a 5.4, 5.5, and you may say, well, I need to lime this field. Well, the short answer is, if you're managing regeneratively, no, you don't. Okay. Because the biology will mediate the pH. Okay. So as we build biology, the biology mediates the pH. And this is the way nature's been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. Who in the heck was liming, back then? Nobody. All right. So what we have found in all of our research and the work that we have done is that there is biology that's directly around the plant roots. And that's where all the biology is, right? That biology very much controls what we call plant recognized pH. Okay. And so as we build the biology, it mediates the pH right around the plant roots. And that's where it's important. It's the pH that the plant recognizes. Okay. So I would never waste money on lime if I'm, mid 5s or above at all, if I'm implementing regenerative and adaptive practices. Okay. Now, if you're not, you may need to spend money on lime, but why would you not just change your practices so that I don't have to spend that money and I'm making far more money, you know? So that's the short answer to that. And as far as all these other amendments and so forth that are possible, here's my response to that. As you're building regeneratively, if you are still applying, if you still have the same reliance on inputs, you are not being regenerative. Bottom line, okay? You're not making any progress at all because everything you're doing is still reliant on an external input, okay? And an applied input. So over time, you should be weaning yourself off all of these inputs to where you don't have to have any of them. We haven't applied anything at all for more than a dozen years now. Nothing. Yeah, and we have much higher levels of productivity than we had a dozen years ago because we're letting the microbes and the diversity do it for us. So that's the short answer. And if you want to if you think you want to use something, a biological or whatever or compost, whatever, to get a jump start on building biology, here's what you need to do. You need to do test strips, okay, to make sure that whatever amendment you're applying really is working. And you need to have a zero check control next to it where you've done nothing at all and applied nothing at all, so you don't confound things and confuse things. So always have a zero check control and then test strips with whatever you want to try. If you're just applying it across all your acres because somebody told you it works, you don't really know whether it worked or not. Okay. So always do the test strips so that you know that you're either getting benefit or you're not from that expenditure.
So we are at 11 o'clock, and I hate to close. There's a number of other questions that are actually posted, and I'm not sure, Alan, if we could ask you to get on, or I could send you the questions and maybe you could just give some quick answers to it. So for everybody out there, if your questions didn't get answered, I'll get them to Alan, and we just get a few quick replies on that. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm excited to have you here in April. We're looking forward to having you. Alan will be in the Burlington area on the 26th and in the Dartmouth area on the 27th of April. We're hoping to get him out on some early pastures. And so really looking forward to that. Thank you so much. And for everybody else in the conference, the next activity is at 11:30. We're going to do the farmer to farmer networking. You have a chance, if you stay on for more than 20 minutes, to win one of these fantastic hats. And so just navigate in your agenda to that farmer to farmer networking. And again, it'll sort you into tables of 4, and you'll have 10 minutes to chat, and then it'll flip you into another table of 4. So we'll do 3 rotations of that. And I think we're good. That's a wrap. So thank you again so much, Alan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep.